Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, anyways, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I thought would be very, very interesting. So, anyways, this is going to be a video by the good channel, alleged good channel when it comes down to it, AKHi TV. AKHi TV, of course, is a part of what I would like to call the pro-black cult when it comes down to it. And basically what that means is that he's a part of a group called New Media and pretty much the LDBC. They're not exactly the same when it comes down to it, but I would say that they're a good at least 75% the same because they all have pretty much very similar strategies when it comes down to it and very similar narratives. But anyways, AKHi TV, he's going to be releasing overall some footage of an interview that Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. recently had, I believe, with this one Mexican interviewee, this one Mexican chick overall. She's usually on DAZN, reviewing fights, especially in Mexican fighters like Virgil Ortiz or some other guys like that, but I don't really remember her name. But when it comes down to it, all in all, she's going to be talking to Julio Cesar Chavez about where he thinks, all in all, Canelo Alvarez ranks. And on top of that, does he still believe that he is the greatest Mexican fighter of all time? Now, certain people overall, they may say that these certain Mexican fighters or these other fighters, all in all, they may say, oh, well, they're so humble overall because they're not putting themselves in the conversation directly when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, don't get it twisted. These guys, they believe, all in all, that they are the greatest fighters of all time. And Juan Manuel Marquez, like I did a video on him yesterday, Juan Manuel Marquez, he's been a clear hater of Canelo Alvarez for a very long time. Julio Cesar Chavez, I don't think that he's a hater of Canelo. I don't think that he's jealous of Canelo. But I do think, all in all, that he realizes that, Canelo Alvarez, he's pretty much the next one to hold the torch. Like I said this in my other videos, Julio Cesar Chavez realizes that Canelo Alvarez is his successor. Marco Antonio Barrera, Juan Manuel Marquez, and Erik Morales, they were all great fighters, but they cannot be compared to the Julio Cesar Chavez senior level. Because Julio Cesar Chavez, at one point in time, he was the clear number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world, or at least the debatable one. I can't ever say that about Erik Morales or Juan Manuel Marquez or Marco Antonio Barrera. But you can say that about Canelo Alvarez. As of right now, Canelo Alvarez, excuse me, in my opinion, has debatably been, the best pound-for-pound fighter within the past few years. He certainly has been the best pound-for-pound fighter ever since Vasyl Lomachenko lost his fight against Teofimo Lopez. Canelo has a great resume. He is already a four-weight division champion. He almost has 60 complete wins on his resume, and he has almost at least 10 clear A-class wins, in my opinion, on his resume. You have a win over Araceli Lara. You have a win over Gennady Golovkin, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith. Of course, those may not be as high as some of the others, but they're still A-grade fighters. You have a win all in all over Austin Trout when he was at his best, Miguel Cotto, Sergey Kovalev, Danny Jacobs. All those guys are very decent fighters, and that's not even me counting certain fighters like a Josesito Lopez or someone else, and Josesito Lopez, I wouldn't necessarily say that he's an A-grade fighter, but my point being is that there's some other fighters that perhaps I could even mention that I have not as of yet. But we're going to see what Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. says in this video. Let's get into it. Let's see what he has to say.
Breaking news of arguably the greatest Mexican fighter of all time, Chavez Sr. He suspects Canelo Alvarez to be on growth hormones, HGH. Check it out.
Pues es un poco, sí es un poco cansado, ¿me entiendes? Porque siempre están comparando, ¿no? A cualquier, primero cuando era Morales, después Barrera, después Juan Manuel Márquez. Y ahora Canelo, ¿me entiendes? Pero, pues, Claudia, las comparaciones...
Julio Cesar Chavez is basically saying, they always try to compare these other Mexican greats to me when it comes down to it. And now some people may say all in all that, well, I don't think that he's saying that. I personally believe that he is. I think in a roundabout way what Julio Cesar Chavez is trying to say, and you're going to see it because within the next, few minutes, you're going to see overall what he truly thinks about himself, which I have no problem with. Once again, Julio, once again, was an all-time great fighter. You can debate him on the level with almost any other boxer in history. He was on that level. He could debatably be a top 10 to top 5 boxer of all time. You could legitimately debate that. Julio was on that level. But when it comes down to it all in all, like I said, all in all, Julio, in a roundabout way, he's basically saying, oh, here we go again. First it was, Morales, then Barrera, then Marquez, and now they got Canelo. And, when are they going to realize that these guys are just not on my level? And I agree that Marco Antonio Barrera and Marquez and Morales, that they're not on the Chavez senior level. But let me tell you what, Canelo's a different type of fighter. This is my opinion of Canelo personally. I can't rank him within that top 10 range yet. I can't rank him necessarily maybe within my top 20. But what I will say is this. When it comes to my top 30 or top 40 fighters of all time, I would say that Canelo Alvarez, he probably would be within my top 30 boxers of all time, which means what? What category is he in? What boxers would I compare him to? I would say that Canelo Alvarez, in my personal opinion, is probably within that Joe Calzaghe, Bernard Hopkins, Andre Ward type of range. Because I believe that those fighters, I think that they're all in a very, very similar category. Multiple weight division champions when it comes down to it, but you wouldn't necessarily put them on the top 10 or top 20 level. Maybe you could debate them there, but, it's not as debatable as it would be with, a Roy Jones Jr. or a Sugar Ray Leonard or Floyd or a Pacquiao or someone else like that. Canelo, in my opinion, is within the top 30 range right now. But in order for him to be higher, in my opinion, he is going to have to take also some of the other bigger fights out there. Now, he has been taking a lot of big fights, don't get it twisted. But I do think all in all that, of course, he is going to have to take every big fight available. Because, of course, the key to being a top 10 fighter of all time or passing the torch is consistency. And Canelo, in my opinion, he probably is the most complete Mexican fighter that I've personally ever seen when you talk about just skill set. But I can't put him on the same level as a Chavez Sr. quite yet. But if Canelo Alvarez, all in all, if he continues to go on this streak, if he beats Charlo, if he beats Benavidez, if he beats Andrade, if he beats Beterbiev, if he beats Bivol, and maybe possibly even goes up to cruiserweight, he has to be talked about in that conversation. No doubt about it. Even if he doesn't move up to cruiserweight, if Canelo Alvarez continues on this path and is the clear number one pound-for-pound fighter for many years to come, or at least, in that conversation for the next remaining, let's say, even 4 to 5 years, he may be in that conversation.
Cada quien, creo que, mira, Claudia, te soy honesto y sinceramente, siempre lo he dicho, no me considero el mejor peleador mexicano de todos los tiempos. Yo creo, Claudia, que cada mexicano campeón del mundo, de los que han hecho historia, han sido grandes en su momento, ¿me entiendes? Ahorita el Canelo, lógicamente, es el mejor mexicano de todos los tiempos, ahorita en la actualidad. Pero ya que tenga que termine su carrera, y de todos modos, voy a seguir siguiendo yo
el... So, like I said, my assertion was pretty much correct. That's in a roundabout way pretty much what Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. was saying. And once again, I don't have a problem with him saying that because he has a right to say all in all that he could compete with any of those fighters or that he is, the greatest of his time or whatever. In my opinion, would I necessarily rank him as the greatest of his time? Maybe not. I would say that was Sugar Ray Leonard of the 80s, but Julio Cesar Chavez, he's not too far apart from those fighters.
Claudia, las estadísticas no mienten, ¿me entiendes? Cuando un peleador llega a 90 peleas invicto, entonces me dices...
Now, Julio Cesar Chavez, he brought up a point overall that, in my opinion, isn't really a great point, but let's talk about it anyway, because this is not the first time that I've heard certain people bring up this point, and Julio Cesar Chavez is not the only fighter that certain people try to bring this up with, especially when you try to talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr. because he has a great resume and he is an undefeated fighter. People always try to bring up this bullshit. They always say, oh, well, he can't be above Julio Cesar Chavez and he can't be above overall Sugar Ray Robinson because, Julio went like 90-0 and Sugar Ray Robinson went like 120-something and, 11 and all this other bullshit. Like, that's great, but when you really take a look at their resume, take a look at some of the fighters that they fought a lot of the times when they were fighting in those filler fights. Now, you can make the case all in all that because they were fighting more often that maybe it could have wore them out a little bit more and maybe it could have been more challenging here and there because, the more that you fight, the less time you have to adapt to the type of fighter and all this other stuff. All that's well and good when it comes down to it, but at the end of the day, a lot of the fighters that Sugar Ray Robinson or Chavez were fighting sometimes in some of these filler fights, they were not A-grade competition. That's not me saying that he does not have a great wins. Like, he has great wins over Hector Macho Camacho and, Roger Mayweather and, over a few other fighters, Meldrick Taylor and, other fighters that I may not even be thinking of right now. I believe another Puerto Rican fighter that was at the lighter weight classes. Julio was a great fighter, all-time great fighter, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. But when it comes down to it, some of the fighters that he would face in between, they would have a record of 10 wins or 10 losses, or 7 wins and 11 losses, or 0 wins and 1 loss. Like, sometimes they would fight fighters that, let's be real, we're the bum of the month club. It is what it is. Especially older fighters of, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they kind of did that. There were certain times where some of them would fight like over damn near 12 times a year. Do you think that they were fighting A-class fighters every single fight in that year? Of course not. No one can do that. It is what it is. That's why today, people pretty much only fight twice a year against A-grade competition. That's how you keep your body kind of preserved and take the little amount, of damage as possible.
Yo creo que ni tú ni yo lo vamos a ver todavía. Pues yo creo que ni tú ni lo vamos a ver otra vez, ¿me entiendes? Un peleador para que llegue a 90 peleas invicto, pues va a estar difícil, ¿me entiendes? Canelo ya ha perdido una pelea, lógicamente, pues ha evolucionado muchísimo.
Even Julio Cesar Chavez has basically said, even though that he lost a fight, he has evolved into a great fighter. And I agree, Julio, in my opinion, like I said, he realizes that Canelo Alvarez, he realizes that he's the real deal. He realizes that he's the real deal. Julio can say whatever he wants. He knows that Canelo Alvarez, all in all, is on a different level compared to some of the other ones that have been compared to him, like a Marco Antonio Barrera or a Juan Manuel Marquez or a Eric Morales, because those guys were never the debatable best fighter of their generation. I can't say that Canelo was the best of his generation when he was younger. I would say, all in all, that was probably Mayweather and Pacquiao, but as of right now, yes, it's Canelo.
Gran peleador que está ganando muchos títulos. Pero las estadísticas ahí están, Claudia.
And like I said, certain people, they know overall, and like I said, there's an old saying, real recognizes real. That's why after Mayweather got done fighting Canelo Alvarez, he said, he's a very talented young fighter, and this is the person, all in all, that is going to pass the torch, or this is the person, all in all, that, he's going to be the next success. He's going to be the next #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Because Mayweather's a very smart individual, especially in the sport of boxing. He's a genius. And he knows, all in all, who is going to be the next #1 pound-for-pound fighter. That's why whenever Mayweather talked about who debatably was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, it usually either remained around Crawford or Canelo, because when you take a look at those fighters, their skill sets compared to a lot of other fighters, they're kind of on a different level. Vasyl Lomachenko was there for a bit, but he can't be on that same level anymore because, of course, he lost to Teofimo Lopez. Now, will he get back on that level? Who knows? But I doubt it. I just don't see it. We'll see what happens.
Yo no soy nadie para decir que soy mejor, ¿me entiendes? O peor.
Y hablando precisamente de límites, yo tuve el gusto de ver gran parte de tus peleas y toda tu carrera. Nunca pasaste de las 147. Tradicionalmente el boxeador mexicano no es ni de estatura ni de tamaño. Sin embargo, vemos esta ironía en Canelo, que lo conocimos en la 147 y ahora está peleando en la 168.
Sí, porque es un peleador, su complexión le da para eso, Claudia. Si tú ves el Canelo, pues muy espaldón, tiene unas piernonas. Y es un peleador que se adapta en 154, 168, 175, lo ves, y no se ve gordo, ¿me entiendes? Yo, la verdad, pues yo nunca...
Now, what did Julio Cesar Chavez just say there? And this is kind of what AKHi TV is going to talk about a little bit as well. He said, all in all, that his body can adapt there. He goes to 154 and 160 and 168, 175, and he can gain weight and he doesn't look fat. What are you saying, Julio? What he really is probably saying, and he is going to say this out loud within the next few minutes, is that Canelo, more than likely, is probably on some type of performance enhancer, or he's on overall some sort of substance that, could be legal today that I was not able to have back then. And that's why also it is difficult to compare generations, because when you take a look at basketball, certain generations, they maybe did not take care of their bodies as much, or, there are better sports sciences today. Like Tom Brady, he's 44 years old, but, and he's still competing at a very high level in the NFL. That probably would have not happened back in the 90s or the 80s, because now Tom Brady, he was a part of the generation like in the 2000s and, partially in the 2010s where, you could hit the quarterback a different type of way. But now, heading, into the latter part of the 2010s and also heading into the 2020s, the quarterback is extremely protected compared to what it was. Quarterback, there's certain quarterbacks that were never the same once they got hit a certain way, like Joe Montana. He was never the same when he got hit a certain way. Joe Theismann, I believe, or Theismann, however you pronounce his name, the quarterback for the Redskins. Of course, he got hit by Lawrence Taylor, snapped his leg in half, never was able to play again.
O sea, no.
143 fue lo máximo.
Lo máximo que di fueron 141 a 142 libras cuando peleé con De La Hoya y cuando peleé con Whittaker. Pero nunca pude dar yo 147 libras, ¿me entiendes? Y la verdad, o sea, a mí no me dio para más, ¿me entiendes? Porque mi comprensión.
But maybe I didn't have the magic. It's true though. Now there are a lot of growth hormones. I agree with you, Julio. I agree. And boxing is not the only sport overall that has this. Basketball has this. Football has this. There's so many guys all in all. There's so many sports all in all that, these sports are riddled with PEDs. It is what it is. That's why, in my opinion, even though people, they criticize Canelo for the PEDs, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's great to take PEDs or anything, but it's so hard for me to, just discredit Canelo completely just because of a one-time PED situation, because I'm a believer that a lot of these boxers are on PEDs anyway. So it is what it is.
¿Verdad? Pero hay peleadores como Canelo que la verdad puede pelear este peso completo, yo creo, y se va a ver así como te gustan a ti.
Unas uvitas, así. Hay que sacarlas así del racimo. Pero hablando en proyección, el boxeo mexicano hoy por hoy, gracias a una figura como Canelo, una figura como tú, como Finito López, ya tienen una proyección internacional. ¿Cómo asumes tú eso, ese papel internacional del boxeador mexicano?
Pues al principio cuando era peleador con mucha responsabilidad, ¿no? Pero no es esa época, pero está en una época, ¿me entiendes? Donde, pues gracias a Dios, el muchacho ha crecido boxísticamente enorme, ¿me entiendes? A lo mejor hubiera competido, ¿me entiendes? Pero hubiera sido mucho más difícil, ¿me entiendes?
He asked the question overall, do you think that Canelo Alvarez overall would have had, and certain people overall, they try to say this when it comes down to it. They say, well, and that's pretty normal for people to debate all in all that their generation was the best. And Chavez was a part of that generation. He was a part of the Duran, Leonard, Hagler, Hearns generation. Even though he was not always necessarily quite in their weight classes, because I don't think he fought any of them. But when it came down to it all in all, would Canelo Alvarez, would he have beat Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran? Of course, it's easy all in all to say for most people that, oh, well, that's just ridiculous. You can never compare, certain fighters to that. But let's be real. Canelo Alvarez, he's an all-time great fighter in his own right. It is what it is. Now, would I have necessarily, for sure, do I think that for sure I can say that Canelo would have 100% beat those guys? No, but can I say 100%, 100% for sure that Canelo would have lost all those fights? Who knows? Because it's not like Sugar Ray Leonard. It's not like he didn't have his trouble with some of his fights. He had a very troubling bout with Roberto Duran in that first fight. And he had a very troubling bout, both fights with Tommy Hearns. Of course, he was a different type of fighter. Tommy Hearns, he was a great fighter as well. I'm going to say this, and a lot of people may disagree with me. I'm not sure if Tommy Hearns is on the Canelo Alvarez level, because Tommy Hearns was never the number one pound-for-pound fighter. And on top of that, Tommy Hearns, he was a person that, he was very, very skilled, but he also was known for, let's be real with Tommy here, besides the Roberto Duran win, he lost to Sugar Ray Leonard, and he also lost to Marvin Hagler. Those are the two biggest wins, those are the two biggest fights of his career, and he lost them. That's why when, people, when they say that, oh, Tommy Hearns, you can't even compare certain fighters like Manny Pacquiao and Canelo Alvarez to Tommy Hearns because Tommy Hearns had so many big wins in his career. Well, he had big wins in his career, but let's be real. Tommy Hearns wasn't like, Tommy Hearns wasn't ever like the number one pound-for-pound fighter now. Tommy Hearns, he lost to Sugar Ray Leonard. I thought that Tommy won the rematch against Sugar Ray when it came down to it, but all in all, usually Tommy lost the big A-plus fights. It is what it is.
Bueno, pero estamos en esta época y mucho ha cambiado en el boxeo. Recuerdo cuando...
And of course you beat Roberto Duran, but let's be real, Roberto Duran was a dude that, I think that Roberto Duran in certain terms has been a little bit overrated here and there, because he lost a lot of the bigger fights that he moved up in. But let's also be fair to Roberto Duran here. Roberto Duran was a person that really was a natural lightweight. So it is what it is, So Tommy, he's a person that's about 6'1" with a 78-inch reach, a natural welterweight at least, if not even a natural 154-pounder. of course you're supposed to defeat Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran has almost every physical disadvantage over you. So it is what it is. But Roberto Duran gave Marvin Hagler a much tougher fight. And on top of that, Roberto Duran, he also beat Sugar Ray Leonard once definitively. So I can't put Tommy Hearns on the Roberto Duran level. I can't put him on the Marvin Hagler level. And I can't put him on the Sugar Ray Leonard level. Tommy Hearns, in my opinion, is like on that Bernard Hopkins level. So I guess in a way you could say that Canelo, because I said earlier in the video that I think Bernard and Canelo, that they're on a similar level, kind of like on that Joe Calzaghe, Andre Ward level as well. You can say that, maybe Tommy Hearns, and Canelo, that they're within there. But to say that Tommy Hearns, that he just would have 100% whooped Canelo's ass, no, come on, man. That's not me saying that maybe Tommy Hearns would have not beat Canelo Alvarez, but we can never say that for sure.
Moderno. Desde tu punto de vista, ahora como analista, ¿qué tiene que cambiar en el boxeo?
Pues tiene que cambiar, Claudia, de que el peleador tiene que defender su campeonato, Claudia. ¿Me entiendes? Ellos escogen a los peleadores o agarran los peleadores o los promotores escogen las peleas para que les genere más dinero. O sea, se ve que en la actualidad se basa más en el dinero que en lo deportivo, Claudia. Es mi punto de vista, ¿no? Porque si tú ves, Claudia...
So basically what he may be alleging is that Canelo Alvarez, all in all, does not face the best of competition. Maybe. But once again, I disagree with that. Canelo Alvarez, all in all, he is facing some great fighters.
En la actualidad, ay Dios santo, la cantidad de campeones mundiales que hay en la actualidad es increíble, Claudia, la verdad. Ya yo lo dije en son seria y...
But, like I said, there's always so many narratives that go around. People try to say with the older generations that, oh, well, with the older generations, when it came down to it, that's, they always fought the best when it came down to it, and no one ever ducked anyone, but that's not the truth. In fact, a lot of people, they actually criticized Sugar Ray Leonard, who, in my opinion, was the greatest fighter of the 80s. They actually mainly criticized him because they thought he was avoiding Aaron Pryor, or they thought that, all in all, he was avoiding a Marvin Hagler, which he did wait a little bit for the Marvin Hagler fight, but I thought that Sugar Ray beat him anyway, so it is what it is. Sugar Ray Leonard has to be counted as the best fighter of that era.
Entre eso se me echó ahí pero cualquier pendejo, cualquier tonto, la neta, con todo respeto, es campeón del mundo ahora. Porque hay muchas más facilidades.
He does have a point, all in all. What I will say is this. I do believe that there were less weight classes back then. So someone can be a 4-weight division champion now and it be a little bit different than what it was, maybe back in the 80s, I believe, or, somewhere like in the 70s, somewhere around there.
Y campeón interino, que campeón
de diamante, plata.
No, hombre, no.
No hay uno.
Ya me dan ganas de volver a ver si hay campeones mundiales de los 60 años.
Vaya, vamos, si tú vas, yo voy. Pero aquí antes de despedirnos, te voy a poner contra las cuerdas, que tú sabes que es mi especialidad poner a la gente.
There's an America we build and one we explore.
That was the legend, the myth, the one and only Chavez Sr. As you all heard, Chavez Sr. believes Canelo Alvarez is on PEDs. He stated, quote, he, Saul Canelo Alvarez, is a fighter who adapts at 154, at 160, at 168, at 175. Maybe I don't know the magic trick for it. You know what I mean? It's true though. Now there are a lot of growth hormones. Lots of magical little things. End of the quote. Now, Chavez Sr. tried to catch himself by stating natural supplements afterwards. However, Sr. already have spilled too much of the truth. I mean, there is nothing magical about nutritional supplements. And Combuterol is definitely not a nutritional supplement. There is nothing natural about it. Last time I checked, nutritional supplements don't cure stamina issues. However, Combuterol does because it's a growth hormone. With the facts being stated, to all you Canelo fans, don't hate the messenger. Don't hate the person that's reporting the news. Hate the message. It wasn't me who said this. It was arguably the greatest Mexican fighter of all time, Chavez Sr., who did. Chavez Sr. is the one suspecting Canelo.
Well, I don't necessarily have a problem, all in all, with what Chavez said, because I think about 75% at least, if not 80% of what he said probably was the truth, at least when it comes to certain fighters, you know. All in all, certain fighters may pick fights. Now, do I believe that, have I ever been on the narrative that Canelo, that, oh, he just fights nothing but bums? No, I've never overall been on that. It's very clear that when you take a look at Canelo Alvarez, and if you know what you're watching, he is facing A-grade fighters. Caleb Plant, at the end of the day, he is an A-grade fighter. It is what it is.
Being on something magical, HGH, which he have every right to, because Canelo Alvarez cheated in the past against Gennady Golovkin by taking Combuterol. He tested positive for steroids, failing both the A and the B sample. Therefore, don't hate the messenger, hate the message. Now, after Chavez Sr. made these remarks on DAZN, they completely buried this interview. Apparently, DAZN haven't got the memo. That's something not possible during this digital age. Furthermore, I completely agree with Chavez Sr. for multiple reasons. He made valid points. I mean, how else would you explain Canelo Alvarez no longer having stamina issues? They mysteriously went.
Well, let me say this. Canelo Alvarez used to have stamina issues, in my opinion, because I don't think Canelo Alvarez used to, all in all, pace himself extremely well. Now, could it be because of certain supplements? Could it be because of certain performance-enhancing drugs? It could be. But what I'm going to say is this. Canelo Alvarez, all in all, I think that he has learned to pace himself much better, all in all, than what he used to. I don't see Canelo Alvarez. He's very careful overall, you know, how he throws punches now and how many he throws. He's much better defensively when it comes down to it. So Canelo knows how to pace himself. He's never going to be a guy that is going to be able to throw as much as like a Terrence Crawford or a Floyd Mayweather Jr. He's never going to be a dude that can throw usually as much as them because, you know, maybe if there's one thing you would criticize about Canelo physically is that maybe still he does not have an A-plus gas tank. But there's a reason why certain fighters, you know, when they don't have an A-plus gas tank, they may pace themselves. Canelo Alvarez, he's just too good defensively at this point in time in his career. If a fighter is going to beat him, in my opinion, you're also going to have to go to his body. And for whatever reason, certain people, they just don't like to risk it. They don't like to go after Canelo Alvarez's body. And it's probably because of Canelo Alvarez's counterpunching ability.
In a way. Now, it's one thing if Canelo wasn't dedicated, at least back in the day when he had stamina issues, and now he's dedicated. However, Canelo Alvarez have been dedicated his whole entire career. Therefore, that's clearly not the case. So how did Canelo Alvarez magically got over his stamina issues? Like Chavez Sr. said,
well, I don't think necessarily, once again, I don't think the stamina issues are necessarily 100% gone. There are certain people overall that are on steroids and all in all, they still have stamina issues. Stamina issues, when certain people have stamina issues, they never truly 100% go away because sometimes a gas tank, you can work on it. You can, you know, do road work. You can run. You can, you know, go on the treadmill, whatever you want to do. You can, you know, jog for miles. But certain people, they just have a naturally better gas tank than some other guys. Like, you know, Rocky Marciano had a very gifted gas tank. You know, you look at Ezra Charles in an interview. And he said it wasn't just that Rocky Marciano could punch hard. Rocky Marciano could throw more punches than any other heavyweight that I fought. His gas tank was almost unlimited. Canelo doesn't have a gas tank like that. But when it comes down to it, the greatest of fighters, when they have certain disadvantages, they don't overall win to pace themselves. And you have to do that in almost any sport. You know, whether it be tennis, whether it be basketball, football, you have to pace yourself. You know, even in a sprint. You know, when you run, you know, cross country. Now, I've never personally been a runner, but you don't run out, burst sprinting, you know, immediately. You have to, you know, jog a little bit at first or go medium speed, a little bit slow speed maybe, and then you burst it out, you know, in maybe the final couple laps.
Magic is in the growth hormones. HGH. Canelo Alvarez did perform a magic trick when it came to his stamina issues when he started taking Combuterol. And after Canelo tested positive for Combuterol, the WBC president, Mauricio Suleiman, increased the Combuterol limit when it came to drug testing. How ironic is that? Now, Canelo is free to use these magic tricks to get over his stamina issues legally. I mean, how do you explain Canelo Alvarez gassing out against Austin Trout, Angulo? Against Trout, Canelo...
He gassed out against Angulo. I'm not sure if he gassed out against Angulo, but I would have to rewatch that fight because from what I remember, That was an A-class ass whooping. The fights that I seen Canelo Alvarez gas out a little bit when was against Floyd. He did gas out a little bit against Austin Trout, but Canelo Alvarez, like I said, you can still see that it's there. You can see even at certain times he did get tired against Caleb Plant, because there was a round, I believe it was either round 8 or 9, where he had to lay up against the ropes and he kind of had to hold back, and Caleb Plant debatably won that round, but I'm still not sure if he did enough to win that round. Canelo, like I said, the stamina issues are still somewhat there, but he just knows how to pace himself a hell of a lot better. And it helps that his defense is so much better.
Through 2 punches and
because the less that you get hit when it comes down to it, the less energy you're probably going to have to expend, or the less energy it takes overall. Not only does getting hit take away energy from you, but that means all in all, the more that you get hit, the more offense you're going to have to get off, and the more energy you're going to have to expend.
in the later rounds. And against Angulo, he hit Angulo with everything. Every single thing. And still gassed out in the later rounds. However, today, Canelo Alvarez, against the bigger guys at 168, he's like a machine. He gets stronger as the fight goes on.
Well, he gets stronger as the fight goes on, all in all, because Canelo Alvarez, like I said, he knows how to pace himself. He knows how to adapt. And that's what great fighters do. That's one of the major changes that Canelo Alvarez has made in his game plans.
More punches than ever. That is not natural. A fighter who always had stamina issues can't just all of a sudden get over his stamina hump. A fighter is either blessed with having stamina or he's not. And if he's...
I would somewhat agree with that, but you can work on it. I think that you can work on it. What I am going to say is this, that like I said, Canelo Alvarez's stamina issues, I don't think that they're completely gone. And that could come back to bite him in the ass a little bit later on, but the only fighter that I could even possibly see taking advantage of that would be like either a Dimitri Bivol or Artur Beterbiev. Because I'm sorry, but these guys, Charlo and Benavidez and Andrade, I'm not saying that they don't have a slight chance, but I don't see them beating Canelo.
Nah, then all of a sudden he is. That's when PEDs came into play.
They're breaking their own rules or not, doing what they, put.
Oh, Timothy Bradley, when it comes down to it. They're going to use Timothy Bradley's commentary. That's interesting because I thought, according to these guys, Timothy Bradley couldn't be trusted, and I thought Timothy Bradley was working for Massa and that he was an Uncle Tom. But all of a sudden, he says something negative about Canelo Alvarez, and, he's back at the barbecue. Ain't that interesting?
In place. It's a slap in the face once again for boxing.
And that's not me saying all in all that I completely disagree with what Bradley's saying. I just find that interesting.
And once again, WBC, hey, we back Canelo, we beat crooks, whatever you want to call them. That's just what it is, man. It's wrong. It's not right for boxing. Doesn't do anything good for boxing. But as far as Canelo goes, I can just tell you this. Canelo used to get tired. I remember, man. I'm telling you, he used to get tired. This is a guy with 40-something fights at the time. He used to get tired. He got tired in the Danny Jacobs fight. He got tired in a couple fights beforehand,
I'm not sure if he 100% got tired in the Danny Jacobs fight, but I do think that he had a little bit of problems with Danny because Danny's a decently tall fighter compared to Canelo. Danny's about 6 foot and Canelo's about 5'8", 5'9", around there. I'm not even sure if he's a full 5'9". He does not look like a full 5'9", but I would have to see. And on top of that, Canelo Alvarez, he knew that Danny Jacobs has A-grade power. Like, Danny has A-grade power. Danny's not really someone that... he has an A-grade skill set, but he is an A-grade fighter. He's a great athlete.
That was some time ago.
Like Danny Jacobs, at least when he was at his best, and that was around when he fought Canelo. He's not a fighter, all in all, that you want to face at least consistently, because he's a person that if he hits you correctly, he can hurt you.
Years ago, but he would get tired in the second half. In the first Triple G fight, he got tired. But then now all of a sudden, this dude walking guys down.
Danny Jacobs almost is kind of like the Sean Porter, but like a more powerful version. They don't necessarily fight the same, but my point being is that Danny, he's not usually going to beat the A-plus fighters, but he is an A-minus fighter or an A fighter, and he is a person that he's tough for everybody. Like, you don't want to face Danny all in all, consistently, like I said, because Danny, he creates problems for people.
This guy is not getting tired anymore. This guy is actually knocking out guys now, breaking faces, and so it just raises a flag. That's all.
Well, I get your point, Bradley, but let's be real. Has Canelo like never knocked out people before? Like people act like Canelo Alvarez is like, usually was this really light hitter before and all of a sudden he just has this great power. Canelo's always had great power. He's always someone knocked guys out. He knocked down Austin Dry, didn't knock him out, but he knocked him down. He fought consistently against Miguel Cotto. When it came down to it, he knocked out Sergey Kovalev. Now, of course, some would say that was a little bit after, but my point being is this: Canelo has always been known as a dude that has decent power.
I think the facts are there, and these are the fighters, and I just think it's kind of odd. So,
Okay, Kelly, I see you. After years of swiping right on human garbage, looks like you found the man of your dreams.
The second thing is Canelo Alvarez's physique. Like Chavez Sr. pointed out, Canelo Alvarez's body adapted at 154, 160, 168, and 175.
Right, but Canelo Alvarez has that type of body. It is what it is. Now, once again, do I believe that more than likely Canelo Alvarez is on performance-enhancing drugs? Probably. But when it comes down to it, all in all, like I said, to me it's just not, I'm sorry, but to me I just can't derail, Canelo Alvarez's whole entire career because, like I said, I think most of these fighters are on HGH or some sort of PED anyway. It is what it is. I think Manny Pacquiao was on PEDs for a certain amount of his career. I think Juan Manuel Marquez was taking PEDs, especially in that last portion of his career. But it is what it is.
Like it's his natural weight class. Every time Canelo Alvarez moved up in weight, he gained nothing but lean muscle. No fat at all. Even though Canelo is only 5'8". Now, one thing in common about Mexican fighters, their physique...
Right, but Canelo, when it comes down to it, let's also get this straight across as well. Canelo, early on, when he started boxing, I think he was literally in his teenage years. He was 13 years old. Somewhere around there. He kind of had a similar start, kind of like Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao, do I believe a part of the reason why he was able to move up so many weight classes was because of steroids? Yeah, probably. But on top of that, Manny Pacquiao, you don't reach your physical prime, until you're probably about a good, I would say, some would say 20 years old or 19 years old. I would say probably a good 25 years old at least. That's what I would personally say. So Canelo, he's finally, fully reaching, or especially within these past few years, he's finally reaching his, peak maturity physically when it comes down to it. So that's just what Canelo is. Canelo Alvarez, all in all, he's a natural 160 pounder at least. That's just what he is.
is not that muscular.
Because Canelo, all in all, he was never as small as a Marco Antonio Barrera or Chavez or any of these other guys. He was never going to be in the same weight divisions as them.
However, not when it comes to Canelo Alvarez. That is not the case. And even when he's moving up in weight, he's keeping the same physique. He gets more muscular without any fat. Now, unless Canelo...
Okay, so let me know this, AKHi. Is Terrence Crawford, when he's moving up the weight divisions, have you seen any extra fat gained on Terrence Crawford? Or do we still see 6-packs and 8-packs from Terrence Bud Crawford? Have you been alerted whatsoever the fact that Terrence Crawford has been moving up the weight divisions and he really hasn't gained any noticeable fat whatsoever? So I get your point, AKHi. Obviously, Canelo Alvarez at one point in time, he was caught on PEDs. There's no doubt about it. But just to say all in all, because he's moving up the weight divisions and he doesn't look that chubby or fat or anything like that, that's great. But there's certain other fighters that are moving up the weight divisions as well, and they haven't gained that much fat. Alexander Usyk didn't gain that much fat. I mean, of course, he's probably just rehydrating at regular weight for himself anyways, because, at heavyweight, you can rehydrate to whatever you want to. There's no limit. But it is what it is, But Terrence Crawford, he's moving up the weight divisions. He doesn't look extremely, fat or anything like that. In fact, he looks like one solid muscle. It is what it is. Other fighters are the same way. Vasyl Lomachenko. I haven't seen him necessarily gain a whole lot of fat. When you talk about, some other fighters, I haven't seen them gain a whole lot of fat. I haven't seen Errol, well, of course, Errol Spence, he hasn't moved up yet. But, there's been a multitude of fighters overall that have went up weight divisions. And, there hasn't been an extreme amount of noticeable fat on them anyway. I mean, it is what it is. Sometimes, especially with Canelo's case, Canelo kind of limited himself, in my opinion, in terms of draining himself at 154 for a while. I think that was another part of the reason for his stamina issues. Now that Canelo Alvarez is facing fighters at 160 and 168 consistently, Canelo Alvarez, all in all, he does not drain himself as much as he used to. Because Canelo, for a little bit there, was draining himself at 154 pounds. That's why he couldn't even fight at 154 after a while. He had to fight at 155.
Alvarez is not Mexican and he happens to be Irish. Maybe then y'all could explain his body physique. But definitely.
He happens to be Irish. Well, I'm not sure completely of his roots, but what I will say is this, and that's what I say. You know, certain people, they say, well, he's Mexican. I count him as Mexican too, because of course he's born from Mexico. But a lot of people, especially these pro-black cult channels, they don't like Canelo Alvarez because they primarily count him as Caucasian. And there's no fighters that they hate more than the Caucasians. It is what it is. And Canelo Alvarez, you can debate, in my opinion, that he is a Caucasian Hispanic. But when I do take a look at his facial structure, he does look all in all to have some Latino roots. What I mean by that is that he seems to be somewhat mixed.
Just like Chavez.
But there's obviously some Caucasian roots in there somewhere, because not only because of his red hair and freckles, but his skin is, you know, pretty pale. Usually when you take a look at Latino boxers, you know, Julio Cesar Chavez, he's actually pretty light for a boxer as well. Who knows, maybe he even has some European roots as well. A lot of Latino people are very, very mixed, so you never know. But when it comes down to all in all, like I said, Canelo Alvarez, it's obvious that he has some European roots somewhere. There's a European or a Caucasian, you know, if not multiple, you know, in that timeline somewhere.
The senior suspected. Since Canelo Alvarez is Mexican, the magic trick lies on the growth hormones, in which Canelo Alvarez used before, Combuterol. That's not up for debate. Here is what a former champion, Paulie Malignaggi, had to say when it came to Canelo Alvarez moving up and down in weight.
Canelo Kovalev, what do you got?
Come on, I've given my opinion on that.
Paulie is a person, all in all, that not only spoke out about Canelo Alvarez, but he also spoke out about Manny Pacquiao as well. And his belief that they were on steroids. And do I agree with Paulie? Yes. But, you know, it is what it is. A lot of these fighters are on steroids anyway. So, like I said, to me, it's just meh.
What do you think about
We just lost Patrick Day, and I think people got to really start opening their minds to PEDs and this shit. Just because guys aren't failing because the testing sucks doesn't mean guys aren't on it. I'm not blaming Charles Conwell. Whether he is or isn't, it's not my business. Whether anybody is or isn't, it's not my business. But I will tell you, it's not easy to diminish deaths. If you're gonna not test for PEDs, and nobody comes up positive for PEDs, but guys are dying, you don't even know or not know if that's what the cause is. I'll tell you what, everything diminishes a little bit of a few levels if you start testing a lot. But that's a different conversation.
I'm not gonna get into it, man. Please, this is a fucking joke. Yeah. Come on. You know what you do? I tell you what you do. You gotta give. Listen, if you give a 6-month suspension, okay, with no fine and no consistent drug testing after that, what's the point? The guy can just go home right now and he could be doping up right now for all we know. He's suspended. He's not getting tested. He's not doing anything. Okay, the way you handle that, if you want to give a 6-month suspension and let it play out, you fine him. You give a 6-month suspension, and then you put him on a 2-year probationary period where he's consistently and strongly random drug tested throughout the next 2 years. And if he fails any of those tests in the next 2 years, you add 2 or 3 years to that suspension. So then it becomes a 2.5-year suspension. But you know why they won't do that? Because they don't want to actually catch Canelo's cheating. Because if, God forbid, you catch this guy cheating again and you got to spend him for 2-3 years, then you all lose money, and it's a big problem.
I kind of agree with what Paulie Malignaggi is saying, but, you know, this is not the only sport that does this. Trust me, and like I said, Canelo is not the only fighter out there or the only athlete that is on performance-enhancing drugs. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. If they really want to uncover certain files about who's going to certain private dealers and all in all who's going to, who's on steroids, you would be very, very surprised who's on PEDs.
So nobody actually wants to fix
Testing in Mexico.
Yes, that's why he mistimed the cycle.
Surprise.
He mistimed the cycle. He didn't expect them to show up in Mexico. You know what I mean? He didn't expect them to come and show up in Mexico. So he thought like, okay, I'm gonna get to Vegas. By this point, it's gonna clear my system. Nah, my man, we came and surprised you. But I'll tell you what, that's about the time you start testing for a May 5th fight. It's early September, early February, right? So this guy was doing it during his time off, which is the problem in general for if you don't have year-round random drug testing. These guys are gonna do it during their time off consistently. So part of this suspension problem should be 6 months suspension, 2-year probationary period where you're drug tested all the time.
Last but not least, here is an expert on PEDs, Victor Conti, on how frequent PED usage in the sport of boxing is, how beneficial it is, what's the process of cycling off PEDs, and how flawed is the system in the sport of boxing. Check it out.
Learn about crypto and get paid as you learn with Coinbase Earn. We've paid out.
So why does it take day after day after day? And let me give an example. When Nonito Donaire fought Casimero, they dragged their heels for 7 days. Now, Memo Heredia, who was advising Casimero at the time, a known drug supplier, he said, I can clear any drug in 48 hours. Well, why, when they got the letter on Tuesday, did they not submit the forms until Saturday afternoon after the fight had already been canceled, because they'd been told every single day that they were going to cancel the fight if they don't get the forms in. Then they cancel the fight, mysteriously the forms show up. Then he was tested the following Tuesday, but that was 7 days after he got the original notice. So you need to get the forms in promptly, because as we just discussed, some of these drugs can clear in 24 to 48 hours.
Wow. Yeah, so there's plenty of loopholes you could get around by.
When you see people dragging their feet and not enrolling and giving excuses, they're likely tapering off drugs, waiting for the drugs to clear before they enroll.
In your opinion, if a fighter turned down VADA...
Like I said, that's very, very possible. But like I said, Canelo Alvarez, he's not the only one on PEDs. Once again, do I believe likely that he is on PEDs? Yes, I do. But he is not the only one. And I can guarantee you, he's not the only one ranked within my top 10 pound for pound. If not 70% of those fighters are on PEDs. I have no doubt about that whatsoever.
Drug testing, they say no. For no reason whatsoever. Most likely they dirty, right?
I would say that the media needs to be all over them asking why you're not doing the testing, and especially if the A side's willing to pay for it, or they're dictating that there's going to be testing, and why do you drag your heels? Why do you not do the testing? Seems like you have something to hide.
And to eliminate that issue, shouldn't VADA drug testing start as soon as fighters start negotiating instead of when they sign the contract? If you want to fight, you need to agree to VADA drug testing right now before we even negotiate. Would that eliminate some of the issues?
I don't know how you enforce that. How do you enforce when there is no fight that testing start? Who's going to pay for it? I don't think the promoter is going to pay for it. I will tell you, my experience is this testing by VADA is fighter driven. It's not the promoters that want this testing. They don't want testing, because there's been several cases. Lamont Peterson, Andre Berto, where they've invested $250,000 to $500,000 in promoting these fights, and then somebody pops positive. They lose all that money. So they're certainly not looking to have more testing. The promoters themselves, there's a financial incentive there to not do testing. It comes from the boxers forcing, and they either pay themselves or have a sponsor that pays, or they demand that the promoter pays. But the testing is boxer-driven. It's not promoter-driven.
What a lot of people want to know is...
But anyways, that's pretty much overall about it for this video when it comes down to... Well, let me see overall if I can fast forward a little bit. Let me see if AKHi TV says anything worth mentioning. And then I'll pretty much end the video right there.
In your stomach... and depending upon the dose, if you do a normal dose...
So anyways, overall, it seems like the rest of this video is pretty much this interview. But once again, like I said, I do believe overall that a certain amount of fighters certainly are on PEDs. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Do I think that Canelo is one of them? Yes, I do. It is what it is. But that's whatever. Anyways, that's pretty much all about it for this video. I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. And we'll continue maybe to talk about this conversation a little bit later on. But we'll see all know what happens very next. I'm also very excited to see who Canelo Alvarez chooses to face next. Like I said, in my opinion, I have a feeling that he probably is going to go after Jamal Charlo. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's all about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.